Across the pond in the US, Bloomberg reported an estimated $600 million in sales for Romantasy last year, compared with, I think, sales in the region of $450 million the previous year. You'll see on TikTok and on BookTok people using little chili emojis to kind of denote how erotic a novel is, and saying, like, if you want a spicier version of this book, here's one with 3 chilies. This one's got 1, here's one with 4.
Hello, I'm William Lee Adams, and this is What in the World from the BBC World Service. Today we're talking about a book genre that BookTok, TikTok's reading community, is obsessed with. There's usually a female main character, and over the course of the book, she discovers she has a secret power. And then there's a sexy, muscular anti-hero who she falls in love with in a sort of enemies to lovers plot. Now, he's often referred to lovingly on TikTok as a shadow daddy, so think leathery wings and a power to control the darkness. He's also a bit of a bad boy and generally considered very, very hot. Now, put it all together, and we are talking about Romantasy. That's romance meets fantasy. But rather than just describing it to you, we thought we'd give you a little taste, a bit of a teaser, if you will. I'm joined by BBC journalist Maya Davies. Maya, hi.
Hi, how are you?
Really good, and I'm hoping you'll be good after we read a passage written by What in the World's Emily. Now, she's not an author, but she is a reader of Romantasy, and just for the record, she did not use AI. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right.
Jesserelt woke up in a pool of sweat. She grimaced. She'd been having the same dream for weeks now, and it never made any sense to her.
In the dream, she was out walking through her flower fields, which were full of all the colors you could imagine. Everyone in her village always said she had a green thumb, and that if you looked at the fields at the right angle on the right day, they sparkled gold. Today was one of those days.
A dark storm cloud swept across the horizon, and the glittering sheen on the flowers fell away. Jesserelt looked up, perplexed at this change in weather, and realized it was not a storm cloud.
It was a man, gliding on a pair of leathered wings surrounded by pitch-black darkness. The man's gaze turned to her, his blue eyes piercing out of the shadows and into her soul. A silver streak ran through his jet-black hair. He smirked as the cloud around him exploded, making it pour with rain.
She was instantly drenched. Furious, she shouted at him with such rage, she was certain he could feel the heat of her glower all the way up in the sky. As she did, her flowers shone brighter than she had ever seen, and sunbeams of light fled upwards towards him, cracking against his wings, as he dodged and danced away. But then
she would wake. She didn't know who he was, but she knew he was water and air, like she was earth and fire, and that she would think of him every time she closed her eyes. Maya, is it awkward that we just met?
That was a lot. I feel like we're friends now.
Yeah. So Maya, if someone's thinking about getting into this genre, what should they expect?
I mean, they should expect like a wild ride. You're kind of taking 2 genres that are super heady. So you've got fantasy, which is basically, I mean, think Lord of the Rings, think Game of Thrones, also think sci-fi. There are elements of that. So if you want dragons, they're there. They're involved. If you want like fairies, they're also there. And then you've got kind of romance running through them like a backbone with these things called tropes. Do you know what a trope is in literature?
Hey, enemies to lovers.
Exactly. You kind of like stolen my script here, but they're basically like the blueprint for a story or for a relationship. So another huge one, as you say, the shadow daddy. You know and love.
It casts a long shadow, let's just say that.
Exactly that. But I think what's curious about this is actually it's not a new kind of thing in literature. I mean, it goes back to anyone who's like studied Shakespeare. It's a bit Hamlet. It's a bit like the Byronic era, like a dark kind of malcontent, kind of rebellious romantic hero. And like you kind of need to suspend your thinking a bit about like him being a bit mean and maybe slightly toxic, because eventually they fall in love and it's fine.
Team that slays together stays together.
Exactly. You've sold it. End the episode. Yeah.
Well, speaking of sales, what are some of the most popular books that sort of illustrate these tropes?
Okay, so spend like 5 minutes in a bookshop, 30 seconds on BookTok, and you can't really get past A Court of Thorns and Roses. And this is a series of books. The first one actually came out in 2015. and it's still hugely popular right now. And people kind of see it as the kind of gateway into romantasy on TikTok. It follows a girl who lives in this kind of alternative version of Britain where there's a magical realm and a mortal realm, and she's kind of whisked off into the magical realm and held captive in a kind of like Beauty and the Beast style way by this lord who's kind of handsome, kind of hot. And she learns that what she's been told about this magical realm isn't all it seems. And the first book in that series, which again came out 10 years ago, last year it was the 4th best-selling book in like the whole of the UK.
Well, fun can generate money. Do we have any hard data, any sales figures?
Last year, fiction revenue in the UK topped £1 billion for the first time, and that's data from the Publishers Association. And they said quite plainly this was because of the boom in fantasy and romance and their growth on BookTok. So it just like attributed it to that entirely, which is really interesting. Across the pond in the US, Bloomberg reported an estimated $600 million in sales for romantasy last year, compared with, I think, sales in the region of 450 million the previous year. So it's really big business. And Nielsen Bookscan, which is here in the UK, tracking data across the industry, said that romance and fantasy had record-breaking sales years. So if you put that in context, think about 50 Shades of Grey for romance. It was a bigger year than that. Harry Potter for fantasy in 2007 for the last book. Fantasy was bigger than that this year. So it's big.
And on BookTok, TikTok's reading community, there are a lot of young women who are promoting these books. Are they the driving force behind these sales? And if so, why?
They absolutely are. So again, last year's sales, over half of those were for and by women under 35. I think the sales for men were like 16%. So it's like significantly skewed. I think I reported on this for the BBC News website earlier this year, and I spoke with lots of different people. Fans were kind of telling me that it was because, I mean, plainly, most of them have young female protagonists kind of entering a new world, having to figure out their power in that world and their dynamic in different relationships. And that's kind of a relatable experience. And they take seriously the experiences of women. That being said, kind of industry experts I spoke to were more kind of maybe pragmatic about the kind of commercial side of this. So Katie Fraser, who's a reporter at The Bookseller, she was saying, you know, these women are the Swifties. They're the same profile, if they're not a fan of Taylor Swift, they're the same profile as the fans of Taylor Swift. They're putting their money where their mouth is. If they love something, they will buy like 10 different versions of it.
Maya, romantasy books have been getting a lot of love on TikTok. There are more than 1.5 million videos using that hashtag. We wanted to hear from some fans about why they think the genre is so popular.
I'm Shreya, I'm 23 and I'm from Sydney. I love romantasy because it blends the political, magical and fantastical storylines of traditional high fantasy stories, but this time it blends it in with strong female characters and a touch of romance. Romantasy stands out a lot as a space carved by women in a traditionally male-dominated genre. It's risen in popularity amongst so many women because these are female-focused stories of strength, stories of overcoming adversity, but also they showcase the most beautiful egalitarian relationships.
Hi, I'm Ashvini. I'm a bookish content creator based in Toronto, Canada. I love reading romantasy because I think it's just the perfect escape. It's actually the genre that got me back into reading after a many-year hiatus of not reading. And it's just a genre that has a lot to offer, no matter what kind of reader you are. I feel like contemporary romance doesn't really capture the level of yearning and tension that a romance set in a fantasy world does. So there's just something about two characters pining over each other in a high-stakes situation where death and danger literally lurk around every corner in a world without cell phones or modern-day transportation that just makes the story that much more fun.
So romantasy is having a bit of a moment right now, but that's not always been the case. People write it off as chick lit or even trashy. Why is that changing?
Readers tell me that they think the stigma has broken down just because socially and as a society, we don't really engage as much anymore in the concept of a guilty pleasure. People are happy to like what they like and like just talk about it really openly. Others I spoke to were a bit more skeptical and kind of pointed to the money, where publishers have noticed what big money there is in this, that it's huge business for them, and are therefore churning out more of this literature, signing debut writers, even acquiring like fan fiction, for example, and turning it into something publishable or just publishing it as it is. And that therefore increases the audience. People are speaking about it more, and that has kind of broken down the stigma. So it's not necessarily wholesale as a social change. It's a bit of both. It's got the financial element as well.
So Romantasy is clearly having a moment, but that's not always been the case. Sarah Wendell runs Smart Bitches Trashy Books. That's a website and community for lovers of this genre.
Romantasy is having a moment, but I also want to note that fantasy romance has existed for decades. Romantasy itself is a fan-generated portmanteau that makes it easier for readers to be specific about what they're looking for. Romantasy as a genre is also having a moment because the stakes of a fantasy world could be very high, the villains could be very terrifying, but because it is a romance, everything will be okay in the end. That ending is the promise of romance, and that promise is part of the reason why romance has been so denigrated in the past. The promise of a happy ending is also why so many readers love Romantasy. These are stories which focus on courtship and corruption. Romantasy stories are about the realignment of power, where a character who may have been underestimated or disregarded acquires a small amount of power of their own and uses it to seek justice and restore order. When reality is bleak or uncertain or visibly unjust, the resolution of a fictional imbalance is reassuring and compelling to read about, which is one reason why Romantasy is having a moment.
Maya, we've gone over some of the most popular tropes of these books, but we really haven't talked about their spiciness. The fact is, there is sex and there is a focus on sort of pleasure that the female receives. That's right, yeah?
That is right. Don't worry, you're correct. You'll see on TikTok and on BookTok people using little chili emojis to kind of denote how erotic a novel is, and saying like, if you want a spicier version of this book, here's one with 3 chilies. This one's got 1. Here's one with 4. So you can kind of tailor your reading experience to, what you want to get out of it, let's say. So I spoke with a book agent. She's called Rebecca Finch. She's 28. So she's, in this category of women enjoying buying these books, and she's also trying to publish them. She was saying a really big gripe she has working in this field is people referring to these books as just like fairy smut, or like people just like reading them for that purpose. And she's just saying, what's so wrong with that? It's not a big proportion of these books. And also they're largely depicting, in her view, healthy sexual relationships that center female pleasure. So, she says it's an area that still wins the genre some derision, but that it's not really fair.
And if you had to look into the future, forecast what's next, what does it look like?
We need to look at what publishers are doing. They're putting their money into this still. So they're kind of hedging their bets that it's going to carry on. And I think we as well need to look to Hollywood, right? I mean, we've seen what like big TV show adaptations or like film adaptations can do for things like Game of Thrones, for The Hunger Games, which arguably is a romantasy. Twilight, arguably a romantasy. Both ACOTAR, Court of Thorns and Roses, and Fourth Wing have been picked up to be turned into TV shows with really big production studios. But then, the other side of the coin is they're massive, and things can't stay massive forever, especially when it's a lot of similar stuff being produced, arguably. So we'll have to wait and see.
Maya, we are going to let you get back to your reading. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
That is all for today. Thanks for watching another episode of What in the World from the BBC World Service. If you enjoyed, why not subscribe to our YouTube channel? There are over 1.7 million subscribers, and you can be the next one. We'll see you later. Bye.